Hello, listeners, and welcome to a new episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a special edition of the show as we are conducting a panel discussion on the 30th anniversary of the Superman Aliens comic book crossover. Before we introduce our panelists, I do want to note that all episodes of the Fanbase Weekly podcast this month are sponsored by Studio 12-7. We're honored to have Studio 12-7 as a sponsor and look forward to sharing details about the production company with you later in the show. Now, my name is Bryant Dillon. I'm president of Fanbase Press and co-host of the Fanbase Weekly podcast, as well as the writer behind several projects, including our horror graphic novel, Something Animal and Identity Thief. I will also serve as your moderator for this discussion, but let me go ahead and introduce my companions here on this one. We've got David Accampo. He's a writer and designer living in Portland, Oregon. He's written prose, comics, video games, and more. He's the co-creator of the audio drama Wormwood, a serialized mystery, as well as the comic series Lost Angels, the fantasy graphic novel The Margins, which of course has a home at Fanbase Press, and most recently the horror anthology Spectral. David, always great to talk comics and stories with you. Welcome back.
I know. I'm so glad that we get to do like Superman and aliens. It's cool.
Very, very cool.
Excited.
We're also joined by another returning guest, Jack Phoenix. He's a librarian and a writer and author of the School Library Journal star-reviewed book, Maximizing the Impact of Comics in Your Library, graphic novels, manga, and more. He resides in the greater Cleveland area with his husband, two dogs, and two cats, where he works at the collection development manager for Cuyahoga Falls Library. Jack, also always great to talk about comics and story with you as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm going to put the spoiler warning out. I know it's 30 years old, but if you are concerned about Superman and aliens and who comes out on top, read the comics first. We are going to get into spoilerific territory. Let me give a quick summary for those maybe who are less familiar. Remember the story a little bit less. I do want to just give a shout out to Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. We use that as a resource for all these fan base features. So if you can help support them, they definitely need it right now. So reach out. All right, subject at hand: Superman slash aliens, not versus. You got to be aware of that. It's a
Although, just
what were you gonna say?
me being a librarian geek, the fine print in the
Oh,
masthead
does it?
of the trade paperback does list it as Superman versus aliens.
This is such an interesting topic. I mean, I know we're getting derailed already, but this
This has
seems
happened more than once in
this
talking
has
about these crossovers.
yeah, we were talking last year about Chris Claremont's Aliens, Predator, Deadliest of Species, which is also a slash. And I know I've talked to Claremont, and he's very adamant that it's not aliens versus predators, it's aliens and predators, but they still list it some places as aliens versus predators. So I don't know. I don't know who to put that on. Maybe that's a dark horse editorial issue. Who maybe there's a here there could be a division between DC and Marvel or DC and Dark Horse. We don't even know. So
Right.
we will accept for this podcast Superman slash aliens or Superman versus aliens going forward. For those who are not aware, it's a three-issue limited crossover series. It's about the battle between the superheroes, Superman and the Xenomorphs from the Alien film series, which you might have gathered. It's also written and penciled by Dan Jurgens, inked by Kevin Nolan, colored by Gregory Wright, lettered by Bill Oakley, and edited by Mark Carlin, Diana Schutz, Chris Duffy, and Michael Urie. And then, of course, Jurgens and Nolan provide cover art as well for the trade paperback. Now, this limited series was first published by DC and Dark Horse Comics from July to September of 1985, and the writers use a plot device of Superman's powers temporarily diminishing due to him being in a location with a lack of sunlight that his body requires to give him his powers. So this makes the Xenomorphs a believable threat for him. As described in promotional material I found for the series, in the far corners of space, Earth's yellow sun is a distant memory to Superman. Without its nurturing glow, his powers are fading fast. Will they hold out long enough for him to save the doomed city of Argo from an infestation of aliens? Or is the Man of Steel doomed to die amongst what may be the ruins of the long-lost Krypton? But the real threat isn't the alien queen that's stalking him, it's the chest burster planted inside him. Can he beat the bug inside his chest, or is he doomed to die on a distant planet? Um, I did find a smattering, I guess I would say, of miscellaneous points of interest. I mean, I think it's important first to know that Jurgens was one of the most prominent 1990s Superman creators at DC Comics. He had been part of the creative team on the Death of Superman storyline, which was huge. Editor Carlin was the main Superman editor at DC and also worked on that Death of Superman storyline. And then inker Kevin Nolan was likewise well known for his work at DC, mostly DC Vertigo's The Sandman, and also previous work from the Aliens Predator universe. Um, Other little interesting points: the character of Cheryl Kimball, who is the new CEO of LexCorp in the comic, she actually shows up, I guess, in Superman and Lois, the recent TV series, played by an actor, Rebecca Staub, who was introduced as Lex Luthor's personal physician, named Gretchen Kelly, but then revealed her true name later in the series. I guess there wasn't really a connection beyond that. And then last but not least, I think it's important to mention the NECA action figure sets that came out in 2019. I don't know if either of you saw these at the Comic-Con, but they were 2019 exclusives. It was Batman and Predator came in a box together, and Superman and a Superman-ish alien.
Oh, no, I
They're
did not
still
see these.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They're quite
Wow.
amazing. NECA does a beautiful job. And anytime they dipped into the comic books, I always loved it. They did a couple cool ones, Alien Genocide and things like that. But this is something special. But I've been talking for a while. I've spilled the tea on Superman slash aliens. Let's get to your opinions, both of you. It's been 30 years. Tell me what you think about revisiting the series, and also, do you have any memories from when it first came out, what it was like to be there when Superman and Aliens was first being released. Jack, why don't you start us off?
Ooh, okay, so I remember the posters at my
Yeah.
local comic
Hmm.
shop, if you can see that, of the chest burster bursting out of the Superman logo, and that just caught me. I mean, I was like, "What? What? How can that be? How can that be?" And I'm pretty sure that Batman versus Predator had already come about. So I just kind of like I had pretty high hopes, and this delivered. So I remember reading this. I read it in trade paperback. This is one of the earliest trade paperbacks I owned.
Okay.
And I remember just staying at my grandma's house on the couch, reading this sucker and loving it. Right. And so I have carried with me for the past 30 something like years, well, close to 30, um, that love of this book. And when I went to reread it for this podcast, I was like, I mean, it's not going to hold up. It was 96 that I read it. I mean, I know it came out in 95.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, I was like, this isn't really gonna. I mean, it's not gonna, but it does. I think it's. I actually think it's even better now than it was when I was a kid. So, I mean, it's a solid crossover in my opinion,
Okay.
but even more importantly, it's a solid Superman story. I think as we get into the podcast, I think it's kind of weak as an alien story. And we'll talk about that, but as a Superman story, I think it's just great. I really, really loved it.
Do you consider yourself like a pretty well-versed Superman fan?
I do, but that's come with age. So
Okay.
I used to be, Batman's cool, Superman's lame
Mhm.
type of guy, and now that I've gotten older, I love Superman. And now I'm actually looking at Batman a little bit more, like with a little bit more of a critical
Sure.
eye.
Yeah.
Hmm. If I had superpowers, I would want to do good. But you have billions and all you want to do is beat people up, so I'm
Yeah.
kind of like flipping a little bit
You trust
as
the
age.
reporter more than the rich guy. I can tell. We're on
Yeah.
the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Dave, what are your thoughts? Where were you with this series when it first released, and how do you feel about it 30 years later?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unlike Jack, I don't have a memory of like owning it or reading it on a sofa. See, so in the '90s, I was there were okay. I was definitely the Wednesday Warrior by that time. It
Hmm.
was the sort of the thing where you're in your 20s, and I really love DC. Vertigo was like the crown jewel for me at that era. A lot of indie comics, a little bit, I think not a lot of Marvel at that point. I kind of dropped off a lot of Marvel. But I was reading like Superman at the time, the death of Superman. That was such a big deal. So I was very familiar with Dan Jurgens. I also worked at comic shops at different points in the 90s. I don't recall in 95 when this came out if I was working in a shop. If so, I would have read it off the shelf. But I'm thinking that maybe I remember it because I had to choose not to buy it. And I don't know if you guys can relate to this, that Wednesday mentality where there's so many good things out there. This is me in the 90s, was like you're trying to figure out what you can not buy. And so I don't know that I actually read this, or I certainly didn't pour over it like you did, Jack. But I do have a memory of it, and I had strong feelings about Dan Jurgens as a guy who I think is a very much really good craftsman. He didn't always wow me. Like he's sort of a very good workman when it comes to like, and especially telling Superman stories. I think he's very good. He's a very good artist, very good with layouts and panel progression and storytelling. And I think that's all on display here. I think this is also again in the 90s when I'm looking at people that have a little bit, they're bringing more of a voice to it, like the Alan Moore voice that's coming in, all the British
Right.
invasion. And so I'm kind of very interested in that. And Jurgens can kind of come off a little vanilla with Superman at times like that. You know, it's just mainstream comics. So reading it now, it felt pretty fresh. I did have a vague memory of a lot of it, but I was really impressed by everything that Jack talked about. I was very impressed at how, first of all, it's a story that moves. It's very pulpy, but it really is a Superman story. And it comes from someone who absolutely knows Superman, knows this version of Superman at this era and time. And that is like the main thrust of the book. And I really appreciated that. I'm like, oh, here's a guy who has the ability to not kill these things on sight out of sheer terror for his life, and he's wrestling with this moral dilemma. And I think to me that's what really grabbed me in this, is that like no other alien movie has anyone worried about anything except for survival. Like no one's going to treat them like sentient beings, and like maybe I shouldn't kill them, and that's a privilege that Superman has. And you know, I'm maybe getting in too far here, but the idea of the alien being the perfect organism, and Superman being our mythic ideal for what humanity can aspire to, I think that's where the heart of this series is.
You know, it's interesting. I do want to sort of wait until we get into the themes, but I think you hit on one that we'll
Yeah.
definitely want to discuss, which is how interesting it is to have sort of the I guess the two endpoints of the spectrum of
Yeah.
the kind of extraterrestrial that we could encounter. Someone who
Mhm.
would be
Mhm.
so protective and conscious of their power and want to help us and want to integrate, but also honor their own past. And then this thing that just
Yeah.
destroys the nightmare that you could meet in space that just
Yeah.
so yeah, we'll definitely want to get into that because I feel like that's one of, as you said, David, that's one of the really interesting points of airing these two characters together. Um, this is not a, for me, this is not a huge series, I think, for me, just because I'm not a huge Superman fan. I respect the character, but it's never been it's never been a character that I've latched onto the way that others have. I've just kind of
Mhm.
respected his place in stories. And I mean, when someone can use the character really well. So I've never been a Superman hater. It's just been sort of outside my purview. And when I look back at myself in the 90s, I was just not a superhero comic kid. I was reading
Mhm.
sci-fi comics, horror comics. So Aliens is what brought me to this series. Um,
Makes sense.
and I do remember that sense of like having to choose the comics that, I would go in to this little underground comic store in State College, Pennsylvania. It was called the Comic Swap, and they would just have all the new issues lined up on these shelves,
Yeah.
it was very much like, hey, this is a college store. And so like as a high school kid, I felt like I was in a really cool place,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do remember like even the fun thing about the comic store at that point, at least in my life, was even if something wasn't with the comic that you were reading, you seemed aware of it because of the big things were splashed all over the place. There were, posters for events and people were talking about it. So I didn't read Death of Superman, but I knew how big it was because it was in Wizard and it was on the wall and you'd see the issues. And I remember Superman Aliens having this prestige feel to it where it was like it had these glossy covers. I think it was a
Yeah.
few extra pages, and I'm sure it
Mhm.
cost a little bit more than the average issue.
And no ads.
No ads. There you go. Yep. Right. Exactly. And so there was something to it, but I remember I struggled with this idea of like I just didn't know if superheroes fit in with what I thought of aliens. Now I feel like I read it 30 years later and I'm like, there was some real thought put into this. It's not
Yeah.
just a, hey, let's slam our action figures together, which I think people so often assume that these crossovers are going to be. And so I can't wait to get into that discussion with both of you too about like what the new world looks like, especially with Marvel having the Aliens license and
Mm.
the fact that they're putting Alien and Predator and superheroes back together again. Um, but before we get into that, I would love was there anything specific, specific scene or panel or page that stuck out to each of you as sort of like the moment from the comic for you? Dave, why don't you try this one
Uh,
first?
yeah, honestly, and I'm sure you guys will, and this is going to be a popular one, but the moment that Superman's arm comes through with the S symbol on it, and breaking the as the alien is about to chomp down on Lois, I think,
Yeah.
and it's like
Yes.
shattering his teeth, and you just see the muscular arm and the Superman symbol, which he has tied to his spacesuit at that point. That is to me like I feel like that's the moment that had to be like, I'm going to build to this. I love that. And that's the scene or the image, the visual that I remember the most. Besides that, I think what really impressed me again was just the way that he constructed it, where there's just a series of ticking clocks and there's always the tension rising. He's really good at that in that as Superman is further away from the yellow sun, his powers are starting to diminish. And there's a lot of these xenomorphs on the station. And that's really interesting. We got to get out of there. We got to save as many people as we can. And I'm going to put myself to the very edge of my limits to make sure no one dies and everyone gets out. And then to flip that and also have chest bursters coming back and attacking humans on the station, that was a little more vulnerable. But Superman's way out there, he can't get back and save Lois, but he's got to save the other people. That's really good situations you want to put Superman into.
Yeah.
Almost impossible, no one else could do it. It doesn't even seem like he can do it, and to me that is where the strength of this series. That's what I think I referred to it earlier as pulpy, and that's what I meant. Like it's just bam 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 bam, things are happening. So those are some of my favorite bits in this.
Jack, what stood out to you?
So the image that stands out is a weird one.
Okay.
And it has stood out for the past 30 years. And it's when specifically there's one panel where Superman is kind of pointing at the alien. They've just had a tussle. It's his first encounter with one of the xenomorphs. His cape is sort of draped over his shoulders, a little bit more Batman style.
Okay.
And he's just basically he's trying to reason with the xenomorph.
Yes.
And when I remember kind of thinking that that was ridiculous when I was a kid, like just being like, why would you even, what indication does he have that this thing is intelligent? Why would he even bother? Why would he attempt? Why would not just,
Yeah.
and then I realized like, oh no, they really get into that with his whole, like, as Dave pointed out, Jurgens is really getting into the current Superman mythos, the contemporary Superman mythos at the time. And he was like fresh off of being dead. He was fresh off of,
Mhm.
killing those otherworldly, other universe Kryptonians. And also, I remembered that something that I love about Superman and have for years is it's not just intelligent life that he respects. He loves wildlife. He will go
Yeah.
out of his way to
Mhm.
save and protect animals, something that he perceives as an animal. So the aliens would be included in that. So I really thought I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, yeah, he's speaking English, and so of course that's where it gets comic booky. Like, why would the alien understand any of the words? coming out of your mouth, but
You gotta
Right.
try. You gotta try, right?
yeah, he tried. And then what what really kind of astonishes me about it are the strange like Superman kind of callbacks that it made. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was any version of Supergirl at this time. There was no Matrix Supergirl, there was no Matrix Linda Danvers merge.
I think there was I think the Matrix Supergirl had existed, but maybe was gone now.
Okay,
Yeah,
Or
okay.
you know
maybe it
what?
was still there. It's because the Matrix Supergirl, for anybody listening is not familiar, was this protoplasmic blob that took the shape of Supergirl because post Crisis, if I'm not mistaken, there was no Kara Zor-El, no Argo
Right,
City
right,
until
right.
this mini series, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
actually read there's a CBR article that covers this as a legend, a comic legend. And what they suggested was, and there's a quote from Jurgens that backed this up, that he had hoped that Kara would become the new Supergirl, but that the Matrix Supergirl was in the works, and so
Oh,
that the editor said you decided we're going to go this direction, but they just never revisited this
Yeah.
Kara. There was always a
okay.
hope that she might become the new Supergirl.
I have a vague memory of that. I feel like I must have read that somewhere at the time, maybe Dan Jurgens saying that. But and I think maybe a year or two later is probably when the Linda Danvers Peter David Supergirl series started, because that was 90s, right? This
Yeah.
is I mean, my memory could be wrong here. I'm not trying to be an expert, but I know that the Matrix Supergirl as sort of the protoplasmic entity was around for a funeral for a friend and all through that. So I know that, but I think maybe she had dissipated after, because now we're in the mullet Superman era where he's back to
Right.
life and everything. So I think there's no Supergirl at this point, and I think that yeah, he probably hoped that that would be the thing. And then at the same time, Peter David and the Linda Danvers version kind of came into play. That'd be my guess based on what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I know that, post-crisis Superman that was all about making sure that he's the only Kryptonian.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Really trying to, and so, but from what you just said, Brian, that Jurgens was writing this, not thinking of this as an Elseworlds tale,
Yeah.
which is how I read
right,
it.
Mhm.
He really thought this was in canon.
Yeah.
right, yes,
So that, wow,
Well, and
wow,
that's why I think
that's a
like we
whole
don't have
new,
Lex Luthor present, you know. I mean, it's clearly like
right.
there's things where you're like, oh, this is meant to fit right in,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
like
yeah,
100%. I mean, I could tell that, like, and I was even going to mention like that, how that I kind of respected that they were, instead of going back and saying like, let's do a more classic looking version of Superman to
Right.
fight these iconic sci-fi monsters. Instead, they're like, no, 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 let's make it just very like set like in the Superman world
yeah,
of now. But I still didn't quite think that it was supposed to be
Sure.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
actual canon. So
yeah,
that's really cool. But well, but that's so that actually adds a little bit of love that I have for it then, because that was one of the things that I really was kind of shocked by a little bit, that they chose this to introduce a Kara.
Right.
You
Right. Yeah.
know,
mhm,
that
mhm,
to do a callback to Argo City. I was
mhm,
just, because it could have been anything.
Yeah.
It could have been any other alien character that he's trying to partner up and rescue. It could have been any other space colony or whatever that he just got a signal for and then he's on his way. But the
right.
fact that they also linked it to Kryptonian stuff made it that much more personal and
Yeah.
actually made this a surprisingly emotional story. So, yeah, there's a
Definitely.
lot I like about this book.
Definitely agree with all of that. I'm impressed with how, again, like revisiting it 30 years later, it's impressive how much work was put into it, and that it seems like it was taken seriously in many ways.
Mhm,
Um, the things that stood out to me, honestly, as not being familiar with, like, some of the Superman canon, I there's only like one or two pages that depict him killing these other Kryptonians, but they're
mhm,
incredibly impactful. You know,
mhm,
just the way that it's depicted of like sort of Clark revealing, or I guess Superman revealing the kryptonite and these people sort of being cast in this fatal, beam, if you will, or light. And then the other element that, or the, I guess, image that really stays with me is the regurgitation of the the chest burster.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
It's such an interesting thing. This idea that he's racing towards the sun to like sort of beat the chest burster inside him, and then it's like the chest burster just like beats itself to death and
Yeah.
gets spit up by Superman, which is a very sad ending for that little chest burster, but good for Superman. Good for Superman. I mean, it would have been a sad ending for him too. I do want. I'll add this as something to be discussed maybe in the second half. I do want to debate though whether that would happen because what I get stuck is in the headcanon of like, doesn't that chest burster also get powers from the sun? You know, so I will have to chat with both of you soon
I
about
really
that.
want to discuss that. I'm dying to discuss that.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
let's
obviously it depends on the writer, but I was just because
right,
I
right, of
thought that too. I
course.
was like, wait, if it's feeding, if it has his DNA, if they're
Hmm.
hybridization, hybrid creatures.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Brian,
no,
you would probably be the expert on this in terms of the alien biology, in terms of the life cycle and stuff. Because I know there's been some gray area around that in the films where does it take on the genetic material of its host? And I know there was a whole toy line even where it's like, oh, this is an alien that came out
yeah,
of a bull or a horse or a person or a dog or whatever. But that was a big thing in Alien 3, was whether the alien was different because it came out of a
right,
dog, right?
right
Wasn't
out of
that
a
the
dog.
thing?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they've leaned into that. I mean, if you look at like Prometheus and the other Alien movies, I mean, the idea seems to be now is that there is a blend of the DNA because
Yeah.
the Ripley they pull in Alien Resurrection has both DNAs present, and then I guess what and Alien Romulus is suggesting is that the company is chasing this idea of like there's something achievable within the xenomorph biology that we could use to like rewrite our own DNA.
Right. Very good point. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's definitely something to think about. It would have made it a like 5 issue series instead of a 3 issue series.
Well, maybe it goes like this. The chest burster, the inside of Superman was not exposed to the yellow sun
Yeah,
because he was blocked by
that's
Superman.
fair. That's fair.
No,
Maybe it
that
did
was the
not receive
explanation that
it.
I had in my brain. I was like, yeah, yeah, no.
The I have another answer to that, but I'll save it for our discussion.
Okay.
Um,
We're derailing so fast.
that's only in a good way. Only in a
Yeah.
good way. Well, let's before we move on, I do want to talk about Jurgen's art. I mean, we talked on about it a little bit, but how do you think it works for this series? Do you like the character designs, you know, for both, you know, Superman's characters and the xenomorphs and I don't know, is there anything that stands out to you particularly about the way that he approaches this story? Jack, I'll throw it back to you.
I thought the art worked very well. I know that sometimes Jurgen's art gets criticized for like his stiff faces. But in a story like this, which is leaning more into the hard sci-fi and less into the superhero, I really appreciated it. I thought it was perfect. And I also really like his alien. Now, mind you, like he goes with the alien that's my favorite, which is like the plantigrade, weird six finger, like
Yeah.
two
Mhm.
thumbed, alien web thing. Um, which I know I'm sure was more of a dark horse instruction guidance, but I really liked it because especially in this, Superman spends the bulk of the story without his iconic outfit. I
Sure.
mean,
Yeah.
and so I thought that having this be darker and a little bit more um kind of gritty, stiff art rather than something kind of more like fluid and inspirational and larger than life Superman, I thought it worked very well.
Would agree. Dave, what were your thoughts? Did you like this or
Yeah.
did you feel differently?
I did. I think again, it is a very much a pulpy action adventure story. It is a Superman story, and so Dan Jurgens for me has long been like a synonymous with Superman. You know, I think when I started reading, it's not my first exposure to Superman, but like when I started getting into that era, like right before the death of Superman, and there were the 4 books, the Triangle era, and that sort of stuff. Like I really always liked Dan Jurgens was my favorite. You know, he does good sort of John Byrne-esque, you know, sort of clean superheroic stuff. And I think that worked really well. I think, Jack, to your point, that he took the alien, he took a great version of it, and it worked well. But beyond that, so I think he's a good layout artist. I think he's a good storyteller. I think he does clean lines. But I really want to give a shout out to inks by Kevin. I don't know if it's Now. I always growing up, I always said Nowlin because Nowlan.
Yeah,
I don't know
maybe
if
it
it's
is
Nolan or
Nowlin.
Nowlin.
Yeah,
I
Nowlin is
have no
probably
idea.
right.
But he's an inker that I've always liked it when he inks. I've liked his art entirely, but there's an era in the 90s, especially 80s and 90s, when you could really get Bill Zienkiewicz is a great example where when he inks somebody else, you know who it is that inked it. It's not trying to
Yeah.
blend in, it's trying to add to it. And Kevin Nowlan, he does such a great play with shadow, very rich blacks and just use of light and shadow. And I think that is what really brought this into alien territory. And I think you said he worked on an alien book as well.
Yeah, they said he's done some Alien Predator books previously.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that makes sense to me that like because Jurgens is bringing the Superman, Nowlan shadows it all up. It makes it a little creepier for the alien, and I thought it worked really well. He definitely makes it look like his figures a lot of the time, but you can still see the Jurgens in there. But I think the combination of those two was perfect for this series. So I was really impressed when you first do see the shiny beetle black kind of alien, and there's a lot of blacks in that page, the inks and stuff, and it just really works for me. So yeah, I really like it.
One thing I forgot to mention,
Yep.
those creepy alien borders
Yeah,
Yes.
some
those
of
are
the pages had.
fantastic, aren't they?
And when he takes advantage of it during that climactic scene of Superman basically battling the thing in his chest, how Dave, you mentioned the ticking time bomb, how he
Yeah.
was using the border to display the ticking time bomb because the border was showing the alien inside the not hybrid, the
Yeah.
The
embryo
Chester.
inside him starting to move around. And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
That is really cool. That is really
Yeah.
cool. And I felt like one thing that stood out to me too was um, I don't even know how to say this. The scenes with Cheryl and Lois in the space station, because they're paired a lot together and sort of play adversaries with each other. I was just, I don't know, struck by them reading them this time about the visuals. Both these women are depicted incredibly beautiful in these images, but they're also incredibly serious and at each other's throats the entire time. It never
Yeah.
was like sitting here going like, "Oh, look at this cheesecake image of Lois or this LexCorp head." But there's something just uniquely beautiful about this artwork that just it feels like it has a certain personality and really I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to read, and I don't know that I can say that about every comic I read.
Yeah.
Sometimes the artwork is you go through it and you forget that you even kind of like blaze through it. I feel like this one really like it stops you so that you take your time with each panel, especially if you're revisiting it. The first time through maybe you fly through to get to the ending, but there's
You
something
did
really
remind me, Bryant, that there was one moment that was like a clunker for me, and
okay.
it's Kimball and Lois on the bridge, and they're sparring with each other, but it's like the bottom panel of a page, I think, and they're on the bridge and they're staring out at the viewer, at the reader, and Kimball's got her fist balled up, and she's standing in this very heroic pose, and so is they look like they just walked out onto a runway.
They do a
And,
little
and
bit,
that is
yes.
very much a Jurgens like superhero comic art thing, but it didn't feel right for those two characters at that moment. So that was like sort of like this where I'm like, okay. And I just when you said that about the two of them, I remembered that panel
Well,
specifically.
it almost feels like a blend to me of like sort of the I don't know, like this sort of optimistic, like 60s sci-fi vision of like Lost in
Fair.
Space, mixing with like, that 70s Ridley Scott, like,
Yeah.
used universe stuff that came in. And I kind of, maybe it's from the different background that I brought to the series, having not read as much Superman, but I found it interesting that it felt like it had some of that superhero sheen to it,
Yes. Yes.
just
Yes.
throughout. Very interesting stuff. Speaking of the characters, were there any characters specifically that stuck out to either of you that you think are worth noting or discussing? David, I'll throw it back to you.
I mean, for me, I kind of mentioned this at the top, but Superman really focused on whether it's right to kill.
Hmm.
or wrong to kill, you know, like, is there a way out of this without killing? To me, that's the biggest character arc in this, is him really. It's not even an arc, I guess. But sort of like the way the character is depicted. He's going to go all out, to try and you know, and really he is helping people on this station, without much thought as to who are these people or what's happened here. It's sort of like, get him out. You know, he's doing the firefighter job, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and I think it's really important. I think that's what makes this different as an alien story, right? Like, you know, and that's what I said, kind of alluded to earlier when I said that, like, he has this privilege of being able to think about whether or not he should kill, which most people don't, you know. And that's where the ticking clock kind of helps change that dynamic as it goes along. We're like, oh, what if he has to, you know? And you see it's weighing on him because he's constantly thinking back to this, you know, moment where he did have to kill in the past. So to me, that was really the stuff that stands out. I feel like the LexCorp and Kimball didn't. I mean, it felt like a, you know, here's our Wayland Yutani, you know, corporate moment, and so it had that in it, but it didn't. It wasn't Lex Luthor. I think there's a way that kind of part of me, if I were recasting this, I would want to, like, I know Lex was probably gone at the time in the comics, but like, you know, like you talked about wanting to do the ideal version of everything for a crossover like this, you know, I kind of want Lex in there, as my Paul Reiser or the corporation or whatever character you want to put him in there as, you know. So I don't know. I guess for me, it was really just all about Superman in this one.
That makes sense. Jack, were there any characters that stood out to you beyond our leads?
Beyond our leads. So but I feel like this was such a Superman focused story.
Yes.
I mean, so it's
Hmm.
hard for me to, I mean, because I want to say Kara,
Yeah.
but honestly, Kara was in nothing but peril. I mean, it was, like we didn't
She's
really
sort
get
of a reflection on Superman to some degree, and that,
right, right.
yeah.
Like we really didn't get to know her that well
Mhm.
because of the nature of the story that, because it was so fast paced and she provided a lot of exposition and a lot of moving the story along and a lot of motivation for Superman. But we really didn't get to know her that well other than she's tough as nails. She
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
she is that was definitely, there were some homages to Ripley there. There was
Yeah.
Yeah.
she's
And
even
Newt.
kind of Newt-ish,
Yeah. Yeah, she's in between. 16 years old. She's like half Newt, half Ripley.
Right, right.
It's interesting. I hadn't
Yeah, man,
thought about that.
I love seeing her with the flamethrower. With just that was just great. I was like, that's our Ripley moment.
I hadn't thought
You
about
have to
that.
have a Ripley character. So I appreciate that they made the Ripley character actually Supergirl. I mean, that is pretty
That is nice.
that is pretty cool. But it really so it's yeah. I mean, what the characters were. I mean, you had Campbell, you had Lois, you had Kara, and you have Superman. It's a
Superman.
four
That's
character story, really.
Hmm.
yeah, definitely.
So I guess I did appreciate Lois's pointing out in her own little inner monologue as an alien is chasing her, like, Clark said that I'm scrappy. And when he first met me, and Perry White said that I've got, the guts or whatever. Well, I got to use it all to get away from this thing. I
Right,
kind of
right,
like that
right.
moment. One thing I did want to point out though is that this is whenever Superman makes a mistake, it's usually pretty rare, but I do remember that, like, more modern Superman was more prone to making actual errors. And I did appreciate how this story kind of used Superman's qualities against him in this
Yeah.
his compassion ended up causing him to make a horrible mistake where he's like, I have to save these people. He puts them on his ship, sends it on autopilot back to, and then realizes later, like, what he's done. Like, oh
Yeah.
no, I've just
Hmm.
endangered everyone on the station. Oh crap. And that is so, you did not see Superman making mistakes like that in the 60s and 70s, and I really kind of liked that because it wasn't like condemning Superman for being that way.
Yeah.
It was just sort of saying, like, I think Dave, I think you mentioned, or maybe it was you, Bryant, that you said, like, we're dealing with two different, very different views of what an alien life form can be
Yeah.
mashed together. And so I think it was more of just saying, like, look, aliens are nature. They don't care about compassion is not even in their realm and not in their existence. It doesn't you're not going to be rewarded when dealing with these ferocious creatures
Right.
for being compassionate. But that doesn't mean that Superman shouldn't try. But
Hmm.
it was just sort of like, oh shit, like him doing what he does, he just put people in danger, and
Yeah.
that's rare.
It's very true. And then, you know, maybe this is a good transition into talking about a little bit about the themes of this story because I feel like that's one of the big ones is I saw a lot of articles and I did not end up agreeing or sharing any of them with you, but I saw a lot of articles from various geek news sites debating whether this series essentially nullifies or shows a huge flaw in Superman's no kill rule. I think you've argued against it, Jack, and I think you make a good argument. But it seems like there is a sense from some audience members, and at least maybe from the idea of what the creators were exploring, of like Superman's rules or his compassion, as you say, put him at a disadvantage that we
Hmm.
don't see in an alien universe. One of you mentioned like we never see people questioning whether they should kill the
Yeah.
alien, or eliminate the alien. That's not something we deal with. But Superman puts that in a new context with his powers, and as you just noted quite well, Jack, his instincts to save people actually work against him in this series, which is really interesting. I don't know that they dive incredibly deep into it because we get very clear in three issues. Superman's kind of like, no, I'm right. I should not kill things. um, but I mean, maybe if there were consequences, I guess what is really interesting is if the things had gone differently, if Lois had died, if other people, the infestation had spread, would Superman be questioning his approach to this? Is this a situation that goes, hey, well, maybe it's not something where you can always choose not to kill people or not kill other sentient beings. Both of your thoughts? I mean, we can dive into other thematic topics, but let's start here. What are your thoughts on this idea of his compassion or his morality being used against him? Jack, why don't you start us off?
I would say that's what makes this such a good Superman story. And I think that is how you tell a good story with a character, is that you find some quality about a character and you say like, oh, hey, what if that were a weakness? What if that could somehow be exploited? What if that somehow worked against that? To me, it's not necessarily saying that Superman is wrong
Hmm.
or that he should, but it's simply like, this is how we tell a good Superman story, because how in the world do you challenge the most powerful being in the universe? This was one way. Like, what if his compassion works against him?
Hmm.
What if his compassion leads to more destruction
Right.
and more death? So I just thought that just made it like such a great. I thought that was just a great plot point. And like you say, by the end, we're also reminded that it is a Superman story, because he is, of course, he's like, well, no, I am going to question
Hmm. Right.
through during these pages, I am going to question if I'm making the right decision, but ultimately, I'm making the right decision and killing is wrong. And so it ends up being Campbell that ends up killing that last alien,
Right.
even
Hmm.
though it was about to tear into Lois. Um, And Dave, I like how you point out that I mean, that is a privilege that Superman
Hmm.
has. But there's this meme that I've seen recently, or this post that went viral, and I can't get it out of my head. I haven't been able to get it out of my head for like the past year or more. And it says that Superman isn't a power fantasy of what it would, I'm going to phrase this wrong, but what it would be like, what you could do with incredible power. It's a power fantasy of if someone had incredible power, were good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that's the fantasy that
That's the
Superman
fantasy.
embodies.
Hmm.
And so I don't know how much I really want to read a story of Superman. No, I mean, and I have read those stories, and sometimes they're done very well. Like Injustice was very good. Um, but like I don't always want to, I don't necessarily want to read a story where he's crossing over with another franchise that would somehow fundamentally change him.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That would truly make him be like, no, I am, oh my God. And honestly, if we even get into alien mythology, I think there are some arguments too that like maybe there is a lot to learn from them, but if we just weren't so shitty about it, I mean, because the only ones who ever want to learn from the aliens are wanting to weaponize the aliens, and that's always the moral of the alien stories. We have yet to encounter someone who's just like, okay, but what if we kept them safe somewhere? Like
Right.
we're safe from them and they're safe from us.
Alien Park.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, like I mean, I'm sure that in the long line of Dark Horse comics,
Sure.
someone has told that story of someone like trying to kind of treat the
Hmm.
aliens through a conservation lens. But I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
I could see that going somewhere, and I could see Superman being kind of right maybe about that.
Well, I think what you make, the interesting point you make there is one of the things that again, I don't think it's explored in this story, but I always appreciated about Alien Resurrection is we do get to a place with the Ripley character where she is a new character. She's not the Ripley we know. She has a familial bond or genetic bond to the Xenomorph, and there seems to be an understanding of like the Xenomorph isn't necessarily evil, you know?
Yeah,
It's the evil is the humanity, and the Xenomorph is like it is the dark side of nature, as you said. Maybe there is something Lovecraftian in that it is this species that's meant to like, purge the galaxy or something like that. But even in those contexts, I mean, I think that you speak some truth. I mean, from Ripley, the original Ripley's perspective or those characters, we can understand why they feel a certain way about these creatures or want to protect the human race. Um, but you're right. The evil is not the aliens. And even in those first three movies, we have Ripley saying that, you know. The problem
yeah.
is the humans fucking each other over, not not the aliens, you know.
Yeah, before Prometheus came out, one of the things that made the aliens so terrifying to me was that they were just animals.
Hmm.
Yeah.
These are intergalactic animals, and they are doing their thing. They don't think about it. They don't reason. They don't have, they don't come. They're just they're it's survival. They're
Yep.
doing what they do, and that's what we see on Earth. I mean, and so then it was always more like when it was Ripley, like, wanting to say, like, we have to exterminate them. It was more of just extermination, as in, like, if you had termites,
Yeah.
but they
We will
killed.
not survive. It's us or them,
Yeah.
really. Like, yeah. No, very true. Dave, what do you think about this idea of both the argument for the existence of aliens or xenomorphs and also like the compassion used as a flaw or a trip up, I
I
guess,
mean,
for Superman.
yeah, I think those are both classic Superman tropes or dilemmas, I guess. Take again because I think we're all kind of noting that this is kind of much more of a Superman story than an alien story. I think that I keep talking about this idea of this privilege, but yeah, as you guys were saying, that the alien is like this apex predator, but Superman being the only one who can think a little differently, think conservationally, whatever however you want to say that, but you know what I mean, like and so he should be concerned with killing. It should weigh heavily, even if he has to kill. I feel like what makes this a Superman story is that it weighs so heavily on whether or not he should. And so, even if the story ended with him deciding he had to kill and doing it, I would have accepted that because we saw the internal monologue. It's not the same as the Zack Snyder Man of Steel where he has to snap the neck at the end. We see he's tortured by death in the past. It weighs on his soul. He doesn't think that and also he's the last of his kind, driven home by finding this space station. I wish that had come through a little harder. They did do a lot on it, but there was a lot of like expositional stuff about who these people really were and their relationship with the Kryptonians, and that got a little lost for me. Like it felt like, oh, we're trying to like play it both ways, so we're going to spend some time doing some exposition here, and that slowed things down for me. But if you just harken back to, there's a signal in Kryptonese or whatever coming to me, I can go out there. Oh my God, it's a vestige of my people. And
Yeah.
then he's going to like wipe out another species to save those people. Like those kind of big arguments are Superman arguments. What are the needs? What can I do here? And so I think thematically, that's what I loved about it, is that it did put him in the driver's seat. And like I mean, I think a lot of writers will say that it's not about kryptonite. It's not about like this ultimate death trap. It's about how do you go after Superman? You go after Lois, you go after Jimmy, you go after the people, the city he loves, and that's his weakness. His compassion is always going to be his flaw, more so than like rainbow kryptonite. Um, and so how he gets through all that, just puts his head down and keeps going. That's enviable. That's a great trait. And so I really like seeing that in this.
Well, before we take a quick break, I do want to just extend this part of the discussion a little bit and ask both of you, like, what do you think about this concept in application to our own real world? Because I feel like it's such an interesting idea right now with what we've got going on currently. It's not popular in American culture right now to have a great amount of power and not use it for personal gain. It seems like we're very much leaning into the opposite direction. And I feel like specifically with this story, what's interesting is all, as you said, David, these are Superman tropes. But in
Yeah.
this story, we're really have an edge on it to some degree because I feel like the Xenomorph is something that is so easy to go, well, that should be destroyed. That should
Yes.
go away. But when we step out of the Alien franchise and we put it through the Superman perspective of like, well, what would it be like if you had the power to survive a creature like this?
Yeah.
If you suddenly have a higher power status than this creature, even if it is vicious, even if it is deadly, is there, do we have to take a step back and go, do we have a right to destroy something like that? Do we have to look at this through a different perspective than just the same prism that the Alien franchise has made us? And I find that really interesting because we are so quick, to make assumptions about other life forms. We're very, again, very much in a place where it's like, we need ours, give us what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are outside, they're against us. And so this story speaks to me a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on this? Jack, I'll throw it back to you.
So that just actually like oh wait, like just a light bulb just so I remember just two plot points that we haven't really talked about yet. I mean, so we've talked about Superman's privilege of having the power to be able to not kill.
Mm-hmm.
But then it is a plot point that he's powerless
Yeah,
throughout a
Yeah.
lot of the story. He's losing his powers and he still makes that choice. He
Yeah.
still tries to find another way. And then to the bitter end, to the very end of the story, he explains that what he had, whatever he had done to the ship to cause the ship to blow, his intention was actually that there would still be an escape route. He wasn't going to kill the aliens.
right.
He still found a way to get him and Kara off the ship to save lives while not killing all the aliens. And then whatever it was that Kara did ended up causing the explosion that killed them all.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just incredible to me now and almost actually kind of inspiring, which is what I love about Superman, that man, he is not only is he good at not dehumanizing humans, but he's good at humanizing things that aren't human.
Hmm.
And I when I think of Superman as a symbol for us to live up to, man, that's it.
Yes.
If
Yes.
we could only learn from that example and stop, I mean, at the very least, if we could stop dehumanizing each other. And if now is not the perfect time for this country to have that lesson, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think we always need it. I think humanity always needs it. But I just look at all the horrors that have happened that are happening in this country and have been happening globally lately. And it's so much of it just has to do with people seeing each other as lesser, and that, to be exploited for whatever reason, and that their suffering doesn't matter, their lives don't matter, that, nothing matters but me. And even in a story like this, in a silly, ridiculous story like this, a goofy ass crossover that, maybe shouldn't have even happened.
Yeah. Someone thought this could make some money or something,
Yeah, we still have that incredibly valuable lesson.
Right.
Well, not only
Crazy.
that, but it's kind of taking both those properties and taking and pitting them against each other because they are the logical extremes. Xenophobia. I mean, there's something about Aliens as a franchise that is about sort of xenophobia taken to its extreme extent. They are there to kill us. They are there to harm us. There is no good in them. They are just
You can't
animals, as we've
understand them.
said.
Yeah. Right.
And Superman is exactly what Jack said earlier. It's a fantasy, not just of someone having the power to do something, but choosing to do good with it, choosing to leave the world better than he found it. And that is what I think humanity, when we're at our best, we aspire to. We aspire to help our neighbor. We aspire to be kind. We aspire to be good. And so, can you be good? Can you be good over here in the face of this ultimate, blackness of this
Yeah.
void of ethics or morality? And so in a way, it's almost the perfect crossover. And I surprised myself by saying that, but taken through that lens of perfect killing machine and perfect avatar of what we dream humanity is at its best.
Mm-hmm.
It is really interesting. I think we'll dive into it more, but I also find it fascinating that we are approaching a place that we keep referencing, like the Roaring Twenties and the similarities, and we're essentially coming up on the similar cultural values, I guess, that inspired the origination of Superman as a character, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good
And
point. Yeah.
and I can't help but be struck by this idea of like so much of our world and the figures in it are saying greed is good, be out for yourself. And what we really need is kind of what you were saying, Jack. We need a voice out there that is going to inspire, that says, if you have power, retribution, revenge, these are not the things to seek out. Show people that you can have power and still be a leader, be kind,
Mm-hmm.
have grace. But I don't think we haven't reached that point yet. Hopefully it's
Although
around the corner.
although Bryant is maybe worth pointing out that when Superman does come onto the scene, 1938, that he's throwing slumlords out of buildings or whatever. He's not this version of Superman, this Dan Jurgens era
Sure.
of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really don't want to kill. But
Hey,
I
we need
take your
some
point. I just think it's
we need some
interesting that like there
slumlords
are
thrown
multiple
out too.
versions of Superman.
But he was still the champion of the oppressed.
Right,
That's right.
exactly.
That is right.
His methods were just different.
His methods right.
They were very different. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back to discuss a lot more about Superman slash aliens in just a moment. Welcome back, listeners. So we're here in the second half of our 30th anniversary retrospective on Superman slash aliens. And we've dived a little bit into this already, but I wanted to put a focus on the additional changes or suggestions that this series brings to like Superman mythology, brings to alien mythology. Part of it is like what we talked about. Well, maybe we should start there. We've got these aliens that are in Kryptonians, and I guess we have the reveal that they're not Kryptonians. So maybe that explains it. Because my first question was, all right, those aliens that go back to Earth,
Oh,
why don't they have powers?
yeah.
Mhm.
But maybe, again, maybe that's answered by them not being
They're not
Kryptonian.
Kryptonian. Yeah.
And I also could accept, maybe Jack is right, that and Dave, I think you suggested this too, that the sun's rays don't make it to the chest burster in time. So it's an additional, a third or fourth timeline. We should see, you know what? I want a comic from the chest burster's perspective, where it's running against the timeline too. But
And the
yeah.
framing sequence would just be
Yeah,
so
like it's like, no, let
intestines.
me out, let me out.
Yeah.
That's wow.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on the aliens that's in Superman, the aliens that are coming from Kryptonians? Would you assume that they have powers? Jack, you seem to have the same thought that I did.
I did as I was reading it, but I also fall back onto it depends on who's writing it, what story you want to
Yes.
tell,
Hmm.
which is what's fun about the whole alien nebulous, how what traits do they take or don't sort of thing. You could just kind of do whatever you want. And that's part of the joy of it. But if I were telling the story, I probably, I think you mentioned having more pages. I probably would have added more pages to
Yeah.
have that be an additional struggle of like, wait, these things do what now? And, having Superman learn that and then having to actually choose, like, if I go and expose myself to the sun's rays, am I going to
Create like a super
give
alien.
birth to
Yeah.
a super alien that's just going to fly to something stupid, or or do I need to stay here and let it hatch here where it's hopefully not going to ever
What a
encounter the
crazy
sun?
debate. I mean, like
Yeah.
we're going
Yeah.
into some like I mean, I know it expands it a couple issues, but I'm going like how weird would it and you could have gone into some weird body horror of like how do I get this creature out of me without dying? Then I'm also worried about not killing it, maybe. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
And if you wanted to be really lazy, you could even just be like, oh, Superman's the creature hatched, but Superman's healing powers
Mm.
when he was close enough to the sun saved
Hmm.
him. So we still have a super alien and Superman, and now he has to fight the super alien.
You know, there
My
is
God.
Inside the heart of the sun. Oh my God.
there
I
was
kind
a
of see
short
that now.
story in Dark Horse Presents where they suggested that there was one survivor of a chest burster, and it was this guy. It was like this mercenary who had like he was the only known survivor of chest burster. They stitched him back up, and he had like some android parts,
Oh wow.
and but he wasn't much of a character. Like I found the concept interesting, but it didn't seem to affect him much. He
Yeah.
went
See,
on
in a
with his
way
life.
that brings, how I was saying, like to me, like the aliens are they're animals, they're insects, they're termites, they're
Hmm.
interstellar creatures.
Hmm.
That almost does make it shocking in a weird way more realistic to me because we know like any sort of animal attack, any sort of parasitic infection, any sort of deadly virus, someone will survive it.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
there will
Hmm.
always be someone who has some kind of resistance or just luck that will
Hmm.
survive no matter how deadly the thing is. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
that almost makes it even more, and that also just brings it home that these are animals doing their thing. They're not out to necessarily kill you. They don't care. They're just
Yeah.
living. And this is what they do to survive, kind of a
Well,
thing.
and it shows the viability of both sides of these franchises, I think, that you can go so many different places with Superman, but also I think
Yeah.
people get lost in the idea of like, oh, an alien movie has to be an alien on a spaceship, what we've always seen. And I feel like some of the ideas we're coming up with just on the fly are really interesting about like well, yeah, what happens if you survive a chest burster or like when putting in this context, there's part of me that goes down this road with both of you talking about like what would happen if this chest burster survived. Why wouldn't Superman just keep it in the Fortress of Solitude? Why couldn't he have just had
Right.
like a
Yeah,
little
He
chest
has a
burster,
zoo, right? He
like
has
he
a whole
totally
zoo
has.
of surviving animals from Krypton or other planets or whatever, right? So
He
yeah.
there's the
absolutely
conservation
has. I don't
angle.
know if in current continuity he does, but he absolutely has.
He has,
The
yeah.
animated series made a big deal about that.
Yeah.
He saved all those creatures from the preserver ship. Yeah, he would. Oh my God, there should be a universe where Superman has a xenomorph. Even if it's just if he cryogenically keeps it.
Yeah.
Like
Or he
you
gets
could
that
do that.
alien at the end with the no teeth. He's like, "Hey, you got no
Yeah,
teeth. Come live in my."
Come live in my fortress of solitude. Here you
He
go.
feeds the xenomorph with a spoon or something.
This is a Jurassic Park
I
waiting to
love it.
happen, Brian.
I love it.
oh my God.
What are your thoughts, Dave, on super aliens? Is this something that you crossed your mind, and do you want to see something like this?
It crossed my mind. I felt like it was maybe taking it a little too far. And so I took the story as, okay, they're not Kryptonian, so we kind of avoid that. And I kind of
Right.
felt like
Hmm.
that was, but it did. But again, structurally, this is good because it allowed him to be like, hey, Kara, it's fine. You'll be fine. Once you get to the yellow sun, you'll have powers like, oh, you're not actually Kryptonian. You won't have powers. That was a gut punch,
Yeah, that
So, I
was.
mean, the stuff like it allowed for great drama in that regard. But I think as much as talking about it, I kind of want to see like Superman and Super Alien fighting in the heart of the sun with the most power either of them have ever had. Like it's too much for the story. Like I
Yeah.
think that would have been a mistake. Although I did notice that there's a follow-up to this that Chuck Dixon wrote that's called like God War, and I think it has a fourth world characters in it. And
Yeah.
now I want to know what a chest burster coming out of Darkseid would be like. So
Okay.
this just goes down a rabbit hole that we are not prepared for story-wise, I think.
What's interesting is he gets. If I have not read this series, but I read a summary, and it seems like Darkseid is trying to implant the world or the various worlds with aliens. He's
Yeah,
using
that
the
sounds like him.
Xenomorphs, and his son. I don't know this character. His son.
Orion.
Yeah,
Orion.
Ryan gets potentially. I don't know if he gets impregnated or potentially impregnated, but Darkseid is essentially like, I hate you, but this would be a death not worthy of my son, so
Oh yeah,
I
Oh.
will
that's got
not
to be
allow it.
Orion then. Okay,
And
yeah,
so
yeah. Because it's like Darkseid has his biological son and then his adopted son or something, right? And
Right.
like yeah, yeah.
There was a swap, Mr. Miracle and Orion. Child of Darkseid, goes to live with High Father and is raised on New Genesis, where Mr. Miracle goes to Apocalypse and is raised there. That's
Okay.
the swap.
Hey.
well, and there's also at some point a Batman, Alien Predator, Superman series or story as well.
Oh,
I don't know what they're doing in that, but
well, of course there was.
they're all
I do
hanging out.
remember. I don't want to stray too far, but I do remember. I liked Batman versus Predator and its sequels,
Yes.
or at least
Hmm.
the ones that were called that. And I liked Superman versus Aliens, but I
Hmm.
remember not liking Batman versus Aliens or Superman versus Predator.
Was there a Superman versus Predator? I'll have to
There
look that up.
was, and if he loses his powers again,
Okay.
I mean, because of course he does. And it was just very, it did not, I just remember it did not strike me the way that this one does. And
Yeah.
I think that says a lot about this that
Sure.
we've already covered. I think this has emotional resonance. I don't know
Yeah.
if Superman versus Predator did.
Yeah.
I think Superman versus Alien, they're both, again, we talk about it being like the heightened version of each thing, so that fits. Batman versus Predator, I remember Bryant and I, we talked about that on the podcast, and I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that. But in that sense, Predator coming to Gotham feels both like a Predator movie, but it also feels like a new Batman villain.
Yeah.
Like he is the hunter, and this is his whole motif and everything. And so, but Batman versus Aliens is interesting. I know it's been done. There were miniseries about it, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Multiples, right? But at the same time, it made me think in regards to this series is that Batman would just be about surviving the aliens. He would the idea of whether or not they should be killed or not. It would really just to him be like survival horror,
Yeah.
and Batman can survive anything, so he can get out of that. And it's just very different than this one, which had this elevated conversation about like, hey, I don't want to kill them. I don't want to kill anything. I just want to live peacefully. Like, can we just all get along? And that bit for Superman, I think is just, and maybe I'm responding to it in 2025 differently, but I was like, yes, please, Superman, where are you? We need this in the world so much right now.
I do think that you're right that there's something about Batman and Predator that fit better together than Batman and aliens. I guess maybe it's the fact that Superman is already an alien, so he's already in that
Yeah.
cosmic world to some degree. Batman feels very I mean, he clearly he's expanded beyond, but he feels very like a street
Yeah.
hero,
Yeah.
like he's most at home when like we're in the streets of Gotham, and Batman Predator leans into that in some really successful ways.
Yeah.
You know, um, I gotta say that it's interesting. I'm going back a little bit, but I like that I like that we have this discussion about how like it's really Superman aliens because it's a story that is purely Superman. He's alone.
Hmm.
It's not Superman and friends and aliens.
Right.
But some of these other series seem like maybe we do get to that place. Maybe we do
Yeah.
get to Batman, Superman, Predator, aliens,
Well,
crypto.
yeah,
You
they
know,
did a Justice League versus Predator, I think.
they have they done Justice League for Predator?
Yeah, because I think the Predators had somehow got Justice League powers.
Oh, interesting. I
So
there's some of these I have to check out. I've been interested in what they've been doing at Marvel. Some of the Wolverine versus Predator was pretty interesting, and
Hmm.
the Black Panther. So, I mean, I would argue maybe if Superman and Predator didn't make an impact, there's a story out there. I mean, the Predators definitely want to hunt that guy with his powers. They're not like, well, let's depower him and then hunt him. They're definitely like, the flying guy, get his head. Like,
Like, now that's a prize.
seriously. Well, is there anything that we didn't touch on in regards with this idea of a new Supergirl that did anyone have any additional thoughts on what that would be like if we did have that character return after this series?
I mean, I think uh what something that Jack you said earlier made me think that structurally, as cool as Kara was in this, she is kind of the damsel in distress the whole time.
She is.
And it's structurally speaking, you know, so she can be like badass and everything, but but she is a lot of times she is that damsel in distress, and I think that's the unfortunate part of this. Somebody always has to be in distress if it's a Superman story. um but but yeah, I don't, there wasn't enough there for me to really think about. I mean, would I have liked it if Kara then returns and it becomes like Supergirl or Power Girl or whoever on DC in DC continuity?
Well, let me ask this specifically because would it, without the debate of whether it's Supergirl, do you think it would have been more impactful or a smarter choice to follow through in the idea of establishing this within canon by having that character return in some way
Mm.
within the superhero mythology, or I guess Superman mythology?
Based just on this, I'm not sure. What I think, and I know I'm being vague about that, but what I want to
Mhm.
say is one thing that I kind of wanted a little bit more of. There's a lot of exposition about, you know, why they're here and all this stuff. And if I were rewriting it, if I were giving it the extra pages, I wanted more of what it means to Superman to find Argo as this Kryptonian, presumably space station, and what it means to him, and really let that sink in. What Kara means to him in this post-crisis version of Superman, where he's the only Kryptonian, that's huge. That should be
Yeah.
huge. And the loss when he realizes that she's not Kryptonian, but he still feels like she's a sister to him. He makes that very clear. He's very accepting of her. But it's such a weird, like, I feel like that could be a whole season of a TV show of, like, you know, you're not Kryptonian, but you have these rituals that are Kryptonian, and I love you for that. I'm still a loner, but like I'm not quite as alone anymore. I mean, that's real meaty stuff, and we didn't get to dig into that. So if they were going to do something with Kara post this series, um, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about this. I kind of just took it as like this is a
A
one and
one-off.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't need to revisit it. And I kind of love her flying off at the end potentially, but yeah, I don't have strong feelings about whether she should continue to play a role, but I did want in this series more time spent with Kara and Clark in terms of like what it means to him, what she means to him, what she represents, and what he loses in losing her again.
Well, and it's interesting when you say that too. I also think about we didn't have time to explore like what it is to lose Argo or even a pseudo
Mhm.
Argo as well, because you're like, well, even if the aliens have ravaged this place, it is a place of
Yeah,
Kryptonian culture and knowledge, and he has to destroy it or it gets destroyed,
yeah.
abandoned,
Like
at some point.
archaeologically and historically speaking, that's huge for him.
Yeah.
Jack, what are your thoughts on? Do you think that it's better that this is a standalone, or do you think it would be more powerfully integrated into the continuity more thoroughly, I guess?
When I was a kid, I think I would have loved the idea that Superman and aliens somehow exist in the same universe, right?
Right.
That I watched those movies, and in the past there was a Superman
Yeah,
on that
Christopher
Earth,
Reeves
on
is just
Ripley's Earth.
Yeah.
off screen.
Yeah. But as an adult, now that I know a little bit more about storytelling and franchises, and I mean just all of this,
Mhm.
I think they are better as these crossover things are better as what DC would have called Elseworld stories,
Sure.
as one-shot stories, one-off stories that is are because I think it also frees you up it would free you up creatively to
Yeah.
be able to explore even more themes if you're not confined by continuity and having to say like, no, 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 this is canon.
Yeah.
Superman met aliens.
Right.
Aliens are in the
Yeah.
DC universe. This is canon. Because that also just raises a whole bunch of questions. And historically, it doesn't quite work out, right? So let's look at like one that's happened before. Shang-Chi was originally introduced as Fu Manchu's son because
Right.
Marvel had the rights to Fu Manchu. Marvel no longer has the rights to Fu Manchu. They had to then retroactively go back because they wanted to keep Shang-Chi and re-explain who Shang-Chi's father is.
Hmm.
You had Marvel had the Godzilla license, and Godzilla does this, Godzilla does that. It was all canon until they lost the license, and then Marvel had to retell the stories, and it was Fing Fang Foom.
Hmm.
It was Marvel's dragon that they own. So it just doesn't work. So if you had honestly, if Kara had come back as was apparently Jurgen's plan, which I obviously just learned, um, if that had worked out and the new Supergirl had come back and her first appearance was in the Superman Aliens crossover, as good as I think it is, I don't think I would have been very accepting of
Yeah.
that. I think I would have been kind of like, really?
It ties her origin so much to something that's outside of our knowledge of the DC continuity and all that. It's asking a lot.
It is. It is. And frankly, I mean, Aliens at its core is a franchise that is just very different from there's really no actual room for superheroes unless it's a one-off sort of thing. And the same with superheroes. There's really no room for Aliens because Aliens tries to be, even though it's otherworldly, it's trying to be very grounded. And there's not a lot of space for that either. Probably more space than there is for the aliens than superheroes. Probably more space for aliens and superheroes than there are um, superheroes and aliens. But it's still not quite. It doesn't work for me unless you just say we're having fun. We're gonna explore some things as a one-off little story. Just don't take it too seriously because then I don't. If I know that it's not connect, if I know it's a one-off, I don't take it too seriously.
Well, this is actually the subject I want to dive into next because I feel like we, as I mentioned earlier in the first half, we're in a new era. Marvel has reclaimed the Alien license and the Predator license, and in I guess not reclaimed, but just usurped. They have, eaten 20th Century Fox through Disney. They now have, these former Dark Horse licenses. And they are using them. We've seen Wolverine versus Predator. We've seen Black Panther versus Predator recently. They're doing an Aliens versus Avengers series with Jonathan Hickman currently, which I've been blown away by. We're only two issues in, but it's so good and it shouldn't be. I'm just like I don't know how an Avengers Aliens comic
Really?
is good. Yeah, I will share some minor spoilers just to set up the idea of this question, but they are doing something very interesting with this where we come into the story. It's an Elseworld kind of deal, a what if.
Okay,
But
good.
we come into a story where the aliens have already taken over the majority of Earth. The Avengers are sort of like fighting their last stand. A lot of them have died, and they're older. We tend to have a lot of older superheroes, especially when it comes to like Nick Fury and Iron Man and characters like that. But then the second issue opened it up by explaining where the aliens came from, and it's like David. We see David from the Prometheus movies,
Oh,
No.
having gone through sort of Prometheus and Alien Covenant, and he's created it's like there's like six Davids now, essentially. And like he's like, we've discovered the multiverse. We're going to not only destroy this universe, but we're going to destroy all universes. And so they all go to different universes with alien biology. And you get into this weird thing where like there's a meeting between like in the past between Tony Stark and David, who's pretending to be human in this universe now, and like a representative of Wayland Yutani, I think. And they
oh,
like
wow.
they get into a thing where like Tony Stark knows he's an android and they attack each other. It's just going into crazy places, where I
That's
was like,
cool.
Wild.
this is cool. But I guess begs the question of I tend to be where you were just a moment ago, Jack. I think that these things work really well as like one-offs, but that they tend to be a little silly, and so you have to kind of like go, accept the silliness and go with it. There are other ones where I've been blown away. Alien vs. Predator, I think, does a fantastic job of approaching it seriously. This new Aliens Avengers series, I'm really impressed by. Batman Predator. Even now, I feel like I'm getting real appreciation for Superman and Aliens from talking with both of you. So I think it begs the question of like, are these really two different tastes, or do they mix better than we think? Because my initial reaction as an Alien fan was always superheroes are a little too out there or I don't know, cartoony to really mix with the Alien universe. But I now am coming to a place where I think you have to approach it a certain way, but the Alien and Predator franchise, these characters are so iconic as creatures that in some ways I feel like they have, you know, mutated into being part of fandom and they're able to be flexible enough to exist in both mediums, both types of, I guess, tone, of stories, or and maybe more than just two, maybe a multitude. Um, I'll throw it right back to you, Jack. What are your thoughts? Do you feel differently? Do you still feel the same? What do you think?
I was beginning to feel differently, and then I thought of something else that made me kind of come back. Okay, so I have both issues of Avengers and Aliens so far, but I've not read them. I was like, I'm gonna wait for the trade.
It's
So
coming
I
out
didn't
very
know
slowly. It's coming out very slowly, so you're
very
probably
slowly.
waiting. Good, waiting for the trade might be good.
Yeah, so I didn't know that it was that clever. That sound, I mean, which just shouldn't surprise me. It's Hickman.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But that sounds like it's very much embracing the out there. Like Hickman has a way of being able to just go so out there that it somehow
Right,
comes back.
Mhm.
To being like, oh, I could believe that because it's so out there.
right, right.
So, okay, so David encountering the multiverse, discovering the multiverse. I'm like, all right. And and the fact that it's a what if, that I'm fine with too. If you tell me that this is a multiversal thing that Superman and aliens fought and it's part of the multiverse, all right, I could buy that there's a universe out there where they're together. Sure. Just don't try to tell me that, Ripley exists in the same universe as Superman. I'm just not gonna buy that. Um, so I guess I feel a little bit better about that. However, with Predator versus which I know that Predator and Aliens are still not quite the same universe yet under Marvel. Am I correct?
They aren't, but they are. I think we can assume that they will
Okay.
be, but they just haven't connected those
Mm.
dots yet. Yeah.
Okay. So like I read, Predator versus Wolverine and Predator versus Black Panther, and they're both by Benjamin Percy, I believe. And I
Mhm.
liked them until because it felt like this story where it's like, what are the qualities of these characters that we can then explore, do some exploration, and
Hmm.
also have some fun mashing our action figures together, as you so eloquently put it.
Mhm.
But then when I think Benjamin Percy came out and said, like, oh no, no, this is canon now to Wolverine's history, then I was a little bit irritated. I was like, what? No,
It's a little
no,
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
no, like, no, you can't tell me that predators belong in the Marvel. No, no,
Especially
not
because
in
they
616.
integrated
No.
some like I think like don't they like reverse engineer like some of the Predator technology to make some
Yes,
of the
to
Weapon
create the
X?
Weapon X
Yeah.
program, which is great. It's great. Again, I love that as a one-off. You want to go
Yeah.
for that? It's
Hmm.
like saying like that's awesome. But to tell me that that's now like that's permanent, that's canon, I'm gonna
Yeah.
reject it a little bit.
Well, I don't,
And
and we don't even know if it's true because, like, I'm like, if they pull up a Marvel source book, is it really going to say, "Oh, by the way, Predator technology was reverse
I mean, I,
engineered
I hope not. I hope not.
to create the Weapon X program"?
Gotcha. So, but I also, when you were speaking, something else dawned on me, and I
Okay.
realized what it is about where I'm like, oh no, ultimately, no, they don't belong together. And here's why.
Okay.
Aliens is at its core an R-rated franchise. It's an R-rated story. It is blood and guts and chests bursting, and you cannot convince me, even in a world of superheroes, that if someone's chest explodes and a creature comes out, that someone's not going to yell fuck. And superheroes, even when it's so when Aliens is trying to be PG-13, it feels disingenuous and it doesn't.
Agreed.
I
Agreed.
know that something's off, that this isn't a real alien story. We might be having fun because it's a one-off thing, but it's not a real alien story. And it's the same for superheroes. When the Marvel characters or the mainstream DC characters are thrown into something that's R-rated, I'm like, this isn't real. This isn't really them because they are at their core, they are not R-rated characters. So that to me, like the two just don't work.
I
That
had
makes sense.
I
Go
had a
ahead, Dave.
similar thought, Jack. As you were saying that, this is what I was leading up to is that, and it's going to sound a little weird, but I think looking at it, and Bryant, you kind of made me think of this, looking at it from an alien fan perspective, superheroes do not fit. Soup Aliens can work better within a superhero universe
Sure.
if you look at them as supervillains. Oops, sorry. Because you're always looking for some bigger threat. It's not always Batman punching the Joker. You've got to have like a Killer Croc in there. You've got to have
Sure.
a Solomon Grundy or so. Put make it harder for him, amp up the powers. So I
Yeah.
think that they work um as supervillains. I say that with big air quotes, in a superhero universe, but I agree with Jack that ultimately at their roots they're child fantasies, and so if you get so that doesn't quite mash with the horror that we have always had with the Alien movies, and so there is a thing there. But I think from an Alien perspective, superheroes are just too much. Like the whole thing is it's survival horror. It is people on a cargo ship making their way home, and now suddenly this killing machine is on board with them. I mean, that's a horror movie, right? Even the Marines coming in the second one, they're kind of like our superhero stand-ins, right? They have guns, but we quickly start, oh, can't shoot in here, and we kind of quickly do the same sort of taking away their powers
Yeah.
that Superman and Alien did here. So I mean, to answer the overall question, I feel like it's a case by case. Anyone can do it. Someone like Hickman can probably do a great I almost said JLA, but Avengers Alien series. Do I want it as the regular continuity? No. I mean, I've seen how messy that gets, especially like Jackie mentioned, like Godzilla. And I was thinking of my childhood of like Rom and the Micronauts, having those licenses, making them part of the fabric of the Marvel universe, and then ripping them out again, but that's a long-term fans view of it. I
Sure.
think,
Yeah.
just as a reader, I think it can work both ways, but it's just going to be a case by case, and I don't think you want it permanently interwoven. I would not like it if they just made like aliens canon in the Marvel universe because they could, like sort of like in the old days of, I still feel it's this is weird nerd tangent, but like you still feel it sometimes when all the various characters and properties that DC has absorbed over the years, that Shazam, Captain Marvel doesn't necessarily fit with the Wildcats, but they all are supposed to exist in the same universe, but they come from very different places. And, they're all superheroes. So they mash them together, different levels. But like, can you imagine them trying to do that and put Wayland Yutani next to Stark and have it be an ongoing continuity thing? I don't know.
I agree. I think the getting is messy very fast, and
Yeah.
we've even seen what I find interesting is I would argue that the Alien franchise, at least the films, the tone has been very important. That even if you don't
Yes.
like
Yes.
something like Alien Covenant or Prometheus, it's a similar tone to the approach as grounded sci-fi, I think, as Jack was saying. When they've flirted with other stuff, it feels a little weird, and maybe we will get to a place where it can evolve in that. But Alien Resurrection has like a comic book feel to it, and people were kind of like
Yeah.
felt like it was silly. I feel like I rejected some of Alien Romulus because it was almost too slasher film in the fact that people like were repeating these like known lines and things like that, where
Yeah.
I
It
was
was
like
very
this,
self-aware.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was self-aware in a way that an Alien film usually isn't. And doesn't mean it can't be, but there is a feeling of like there is a tone. I think that it's more flexible within the comic book and video game depictions of aliens and predators. Um, but I guess that brings me to the other question of like, do you feel like while it might not be something we want to integrate into the main continuity, is the world ready for a Batman versus Predator film or an Alien Superman crossover on the big screen? Is that something that we are interested in now, I guess, because we're in a multiverse world. People,
Yeah.
things are happening in comic book films that I'm like, I would have never guessed that people are on board for this stuff and will follow. But now I sit there and go like, Batman Predator doesn't seem like that bad of an idea to stand out from the pack,
this book that we're talking about today, I was reading it going, I would actually really like this as a movie, because that would allow it more time to spend on this like ghost space station, this haunt, this sort of abandoned space station. You could really dig into the horror, Superman losing his powers. Like there was some stuff in there that I was like, I would do this as a movie. This would be cool. It's got to be a standalone thing,
Sure.
but the thing is they're going to turn it into a whole series, and then I would start to get annoyed. But admittedly, there was a part of me that like this is the kind of structure bones that would make for a really good movie to put Superman through his paces in a way that for me would also allow for them to really focus on his disdain for killing and what that means. And we've talked about how that's very important. Empathy is very important today to us. And so I kind of want to see more movies like that where someone goes, hey, maybe I should help everyone. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I wouldn't seek these out, but if they announced they were adapting this into a film, I'd be
Well,
curious.
I don't want to be too cynical about it, but like we're in the waning era of the cinematic universe, and I
Yeah,
wonder if, like, for me at least, I'm like, if Warner Brothers was like, we're doing Superman versus Godzilla, I would be like, I think I'm gonna go see that film, what are your thoughts, Jack? Do you think we need to push forward in this crossover way in the cinematic
Well,
spectrum?
Dave mentioned case by case basis, and I really think that that is what we're seeing here. So
Sure.
I think ultimately where I land is that when they've tried to insist that when Benjamin Percy said that the Wolverine versus Predator was canon, to me that meant that they were taking it too seriously and
Okay.
they weren't
okay.
having fun, right? And so I'm like, well, that's not. I just want you to. I just reading this for fun. I just want to be having fun with it. So if the movie had that vibe of like this is for fun, have fun with it, please.
Right. Hmm.
I think it could work. And frankly, Superman versus Godzilla. This is a tangent. I'm so sorry. You have stuck the thread. Um, Superman versus Godzilla is something that I've wanted to see either in on the page or on the screen for my entire life. And then when I finally got it, it's the MonsterVerse version of Godzilla. And I'm like, well, that's not right. And now we've got the Toho version of Godzilla in the fighting Marvel characters. And like, well, that's not quite right either. I mean, they're all nuclear age, I guess, but this isn't what I wanted. I wanted East versus West, a classic story.
Yeah.
I mean, it could work if if James Gunn is just like, yeah, let's just do a little
Yeah,
one-off
why
thing.
not?
Yeah.
That's not, no one needs an explanation as to who Superman is or Godzilla is.
Yeah.
Let's just do it. I could really enjoy it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, if they introduce like aliens into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and they try to pass that off to me,
I'm thinking of the way everyone was debating whether Mephisto was going to appear
Yeah,
in this
right.
series or that series. And like, can you imagine if we all thought that alien eggs xenomorph eggs might show up in one of these series?
Oh
I
my
Like, oh my
God.
can't. They
God,
could.
don't you see
I
that's a
mean, just
clue?
just imagine if they did nothing but a cameo, because cameos and Easter eggs don't work anymore because now
Right,
the
right.
shared universe has
Yes.
ruined those.
Yeah.
Because so just imagine if an alien egg showed up like in the collector's,
Yeah, right. Hmm.
collection, and everyone would just freak out instead of just seeing it as like a fun Easter egg. They'd be like, "Oh my God,
Yeah. It's coming. It's coming. 13 videos on how we
I could
reach the
really,
aliens.
I could
I
really
mean,
see all this happening in animated form, because
oh,
Yes, very much so.
you
I mean, I,
had the
I'm surprised they
Batman.
haven't done that.
I am too. You had the Batman versus TMNT movie.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
that was a partnership. I mean, I can't imagine the right situation there of like WB working with Paramount
You know
to
what?
make.
Jack, I talked to that director. We did red carpet interviews for that video, and
Really?
he suggested that Batman vs. Predator was one of the things he wanted to do
whoa.
next. So I think they have just not pulled. I'm sure there have been discussions because they're always adapting, the comic books that have a following. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think that's really probably just a licensing issue. But yeah, wouldn't that be? I mean, you're sitting here going like, you guys should really just like both bury the hatchet and make some money off of this already. Like
Yeah, I do miss the Marvel DC crossovers. I do miss
Mm.
that a lot. Those
very
were,
much. Well,
but
let me ask something else that's a little bit outside what we've been discussing. one thing that we're doing for our 15th anniversary at Fanbase Press is putting a focus on community. We feel like it's really important this year that we all understand how much community is necessary within our lives. There's more about the what we're calling the Build Your Community initiative that you can find at fanbasepress.com, so check that out. But one thing I want to do is sort of look at each of these stories that we discuss about um, what the role of community is, if any, within the story. What role does it play? What does the story have to say about community and its importance in our life? So I wanted to ask each of you if you feel like there's anything that Superman Aliens really speaks to in regards to that concept of community. Dave, why don't you take a stab first at this one?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think I've kind of already danced around it a lot, which is just Superman being Superman here. He finds this station, and his immediate thought is to help his neighbor. His immediate thought is, oh my God, refugees, take them in, welcome them, let's take care of them. Let's send them back, even though that turns out to be, dangerous. That's his first thing. And I think, if we're talking about community and connecting with other people, and, we've in this very discussion talked about xenophobia and this sort of low empathy in this place where we find ourselves, where we're really a divided country, and lead by example. Here's a heroic character who is not even he's really debating whether or not, or he's really thinking about how hard it is, or how he really shouldn't ever kill. He doesn't think twice about, like, who are you, why are you here, why are you speaking Kryptonian. He's like, oh my God, family, and I think that welcoming spirit is something that I think is that's where community begins. It's not, spreading gossip or lies or rumors about other people. It is about just embracing and welcoming them in, you know?
It's interesting
So,
that you say that because I feel like it goes back to our conversation about power and what Superman represents, and I feel like it's also easy, and maybe it needs to be said because people are forgetting, but that used to be an American ideal. We used
yeah,
to think of America as a place that welcomed others. That's what the Statue of
exactly.
Liberty is about. That's what our approach to global politics was supposed to be about. We have strayed from that in many ways.
And
It's,
Superman is an immigrant character. I
yeah.
mean, he's always been, that's baked into his DNA from the two Jewish kids that made him, like this is so important. And yeah, it used to be what we stood for. And it doesn't feel like that's the message we're getting from leadership these days. And so yeah, I mean, I think reading this to me it felt throwbacky, but in a beautiful way of like, oh yeah, how pure this is. And so I think that is how you build community.
Well, I hope we'll see. We have a new Superman movie coming, and I hope that we can maybe make this a cool thing again. Because I feel like when I think people have sort of lost in the public, perspective, like what Superman is or who he represents. We're sort of almost he still has like that sort of I don't even know what I would call it. People have this reputation of him being like sort of dated or fuddy-duddy, and
Yeah.
they used to think the same thing about Captain America, and I feel like the MCU and I'm forgetting his name, Chris what's the
Chris Evans.
actor?
Evans.
Chris Evans really brought a real grounded reality to it. It's
Right.
like it's not fake, it's not disingenuous. I'm just a nice guy, and I'm trying to be nice to others,
Yeah.
and I hope that we get that cool back.
I feel like that's what I'm seeing in the trailer for that
Yeah.
Superman movie and James Gunn's whole vibe. So I have high hopes.
Jack, what are your thoughts on what this story has to say about community?
I don't have too many thoughts other than what we've just to emphasize things that we have already said in this
Sure.
conversation. I do want to point out that at the very early pages of this book, he says, I think of myself as human. I think of myself as of Earth, but I'm also this.
Yeah.
And to me, that is in a nutshell like what it is supposed to mean to be an American, what it
Yeah.
can mean to be an American. That, um, just that, yeah, that is he's now. I know that this is in the continuity where he was technically born in on American soil, so he has birthright citizenship and all that. But you know,
Right. Good
but the
point.
facts
Good
that
point. Good point.
but the facts that he that Superman that's just another quality to admire about the character, and what we should aspire to is that
Yeah.
he can see that in himself, and so then he can see that in others. He can understand that I am an American, I am an Earthling, I am all of these things, and they can all work together and mesh. And we that would just be great if we could get back to celebrating that, and if we could see that in other people, that, oh yes, that person was not even born on American soil, but they are here and they are just as American as anybody else because this is what they, you know, uh, I don't even want to say contribute because I also don't want to make it sound like someone's value is based on what they can,
Mhm.
their productivity or something. But it's just we all, it's just it is a breath of fresh air to return to a really good Superman story like this. Um, and the entire story, as you all have already pointed out, really is driven by his need for community, his desire for community. And I think, Bryant, was it you who pointed out that even when he learns that she's not Kryptonian, he doesn't care. I mean, he's a little bit just like, oh,
Right. Hmm.
Yeah.
like deflated just in
Yeah.
because it's just like, oh, I thought this was my people, yada yada. But it didn't for a second cause him to change how he thought of her or change his
Yeah.
motivation or what he was going to do. He still was like, okay, well, you're still coming with me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I mean, we're still going to save you. We're going to figure this out. Like, okay, that just changes my plan. You're not going to have the vulnerability, but we're still going to get you out of here. And I just that is community. That is, I mean, he gets somewhere, he meets someone, he instantly is just like, oh yes, yes, we are family, we
Mhm.
are community. Like just because we both exist.
Yeah. Exactly. Because we both exist, not
Yeah.
because you're Kryptonian or anything else. It's just you are there. You
And
are
we could
alive.
and we could even extend that to the compassion that he was trying to show the aliens.
That's what I
Yeah.
was thinking. It's like
Yeah.
he's even so compassionate that he's like, "Hey, Xenomorph, let's be
Yeah,
friends."
I don't
Yeah.
want to hurt you. I'm going to try to back up. I'm going to try to reason with you. Okay, you're still talking. And then by the very bitter end, he still was like, I regret that you all died. Like that
Yeah.
really, I mean, yeah, these things that could not be any more different from him, he still finds a way to have some kind of feeling of
Yes.
camaraderie for.
Oh man, there is some real, I mean, there is both heart and humor in that because I find it so touching, but I also like have this image of in the head of like, that classic scene from Alien where Brett turns around and the alien's there and him just being like, "Hey, how are you?"
I mean, has anyone tried it?
No one has. You know
No
what?
one's
You
ever tried it in the
treat it like
movies.
a creature that's gonna kill you. Maybe that's what it is, you know?
Yeah. Has anyone tried compassion and
No,
kindness?
it's a very good point, and I think also like one thing that's interesting about what we've talked about is we talked about this idea of Superman viewing the Xenomorph through his own morality on killing, and I think Jack, you mentioned that he talks about how it reflects on him. There is an idea of I don't want to kill this thing, but there's also like, what is it going to do to me? I've
Yes.
carried this burden, I've killed,
Mhm.
and it's destroying me to some degree. I have this pain within me. Um, and I think it just made me think also that one thing I often think about with things like this and this concept of community is that we as humans sometimes lose that even from a selfish perspective we should follow these things. I mean, we need community. Community makes us feel better. You might like have that reaction to someone where you're like, ah, I don't want to engage with this person, or I have too much going on to take on in my life. But generally, at least from in my own personal experience, when I go through the additional awkwardness or struggle that someone who is an introvert has, the reward on the other end is worth it, to connect with another person, to have another friend in your life, to hear someone else's experiences. It enriches you in ways that you don't realize. And cutting yourself off, while it might seem easy in the moment, I think results in unhappiness, and in solitude. And I don't think anyone wants that. And Superman and hero story, these stories speak to this, so. I would just offer that as well. Well, we are approaching the end of our time, but I do want to wrap up as we always do and give our listeners some recommendations about where they can go from here. Jack, what other stories would you recommend? Or I guess it doesn't have to be stories, anything. What the categories are open. What would you recommend if someone enjoyed Superman, Aliens, or this discussion? Where should they go?
The most recent Superman story that made me cry, I would like to recommend, which is and it's not even that recent. It was like pandemic era, but Tom King's Superman Up in the Sky. So this is a collection of like there were I think they were like Walmart exclusives, and Tom King wrote these, so it's very serialized. So it's a kind of a different reading experience than what we're used to from a typical like graphic novel, but it's all about Superman. A little girl is abducted by aliens. And this is in the DC universe. There's aliens everywhere. So like how is this a big deal? Superman then decides, he's like, okay, everyone else is literally busy. No one else can go. Like literally no one else can go find this girl. I have to go. And you have Batman saying like, is that wise? Like you're Superman, this is just one kid. The whole world needs you. Like
Right.
every person on this planet needs you. You've got, other characters saying like you just, are you sure that you have to go? I can't, I mean, it's just one kid versus all these lives. And he chooses, nope, gotta go. And he goes to save this one little girl. And it brought tears to my eyes because it's just like, that is Superman to me. That is like, the least of us, he cares about just as much as like is the entire world to him, like one life. Like, so that was a really, really good story. So there's that. And then I would also recommend other bonkers crossovers that work very well. Because so Joker Mask was an excellent crossover.
I didn't
And
even know that existed. That's
you
awesome.
didn't?
No, I
Oh, it's
didn't.
great. Joker gets a mask. And
Unbelievable.
it's so good. There's also Archie versus the Punisher is a classic, but that one's just a one shot. Yeah, yeah. And then I haven't really read like too many Alien Predator stuff lately, other than the Marvel stuff which we've brought up. But
Right.
I am looking forward to Spider-Man versus Predator.
That'll be interesting.
See how
Very
that
much so.
goes. Yeah.
You're gonna hunt all the various Marvel superheroes at one point.
Okay.
I wish they
Oh,
would kind of do an event, but I'm not in charge. So oh well.
Predator kills the Marvel
Yes,
universe.
exactly. All the predators show up and we're like, we're hunting everyone at the same time. Dave, what would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I first because Jack mentioned it, like on the both on the crazy crossover and Tom King tip of the Batman Elmer Fudd one shot
Oh
is
yeah, that's
pretty amazing.
unbelievably good, isn't it?
I tried looking for that recently and I couldn't find it. Like,
Lee Weeks art, it's phenomenal. It is a great thing. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking about it, and I was really struggling to come up with something. I have two thoughts. One is this version of Superman. What really stood out to me is that, as I said, kind of that throwback to like this 90s Superman who won't kill, who is just genuinely this good person. So maybe go back and read the Triangle era of Superman. I think there's some omnibuses that they have now, or you can read it on their apps. But like early 90s Superman, there's some really good stories that follow that same thing. They're more comic booky, more mainstream superhero on that side, but they really do get at that brightness. And then I was thinking on the other side, something that's a little alien-like mixed with superheroes would be go read the original Brood saga from the X-Men, from the Uncanny X-Men. I think I was trying to look it up while you guys were talking. I think it starts in 156 of Uncanny X-Men. But that, I think, is a great way that aliens, in quotes, can work in well. They have the whole similar life cycle. There's a bit where Wolverine, will his healing factor allow him to survive being infected by the Brood? So basically, like, if a chest burster, all that kind of stuff. And it's fun. I mean, it works well in that context, and you're in the middle of your soap operatic melodrama of X-Men in space. So it just kind of all works. And I think that's fun. If you want that alien, but with the serial numbers filed off, in a superhero world, that's a fun way to go.
You
And
got
that run
me.
brought us some classic. I mean, it brought us Lockheed. It brought
Yeah.
us Binary, Carol Danvers, like, on
Mhm.
her journey. Yeah. Yeah.
You're making me think now, Dave. Like, I wonder if there's like some part, a nightmarish part of the Marvel universe where Wolverine's just cocooned in some alien hive, giving birth to a chest burster, healing, giving
Healing
birth to a
another
chest
one.
burster,
How
healing.
would it get through his
He's the food
adamantium
source to
sternum?
keep
That's
replenishing.
true. How does it get through the adamantium? That's not it. You're right. It's gonna have to come out through his eye or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Or they just keep dying in there.
In
He's
there.
just got dead baby aliens inside his chest.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh man.
Talk about your R-rated body horror. Oh boy.
Exactly, exactly. We'll push it there.
Yeah.
Well, I obviously recommend Aliens versus Avengers if you haven't checked it out. We're two issues, I think. There might be a third issue out now. I've only read two, but they've been fantastic so far. Jonathan Hickman. The other one that I would suggest that you really would have to dig for. I have an issue or two of it, but it has some parallels um with this story, Superman and Aliens, is a crossover between the Valiant character Magnus Robot Fighter and the Predator
Oh
series,
wow.
Oh.
where I don't know much about Magnus, but I remember having some issues where he is a superpower. I think he's actually an android of some sort himself, but he fights these
Mm.
robots in sort of like this, um, utopian
Yeah.
sci-fi society. He gets hunted by the predators in this crossover, but he has a similar thing. He doesn't want to kill. He has a no-kill
Mm.
rule. He's trying to battle the predator without killing it, and deals with it in different ways. I will say I won't ruin anything, but you can check that out if you can find a copy of it. The other thing that I do want to mention from Fanbase Press is we did a video panel on Batman versus Predator for the 30th anniversary of that comic book series. We were lucky enough to have Dave Gibbons join us for that, and it was phenomenal. It was one of the top experiences of my comic book life, and you can check it out. We have a YouTube video of it, and I think an audio version as well on the podcast. So check those out. I'll put the links in our show notes. But David, Jack, thank you so much. This was a fantastic discussion. I always
Yeah.
love these because you never know where we're going to end up. And I feel like we covered so much with this story. And I obviously want to give a chance for both of you to let people know where they can find you and your work online. So let's do that now. Jack, where can people find you and your work?
I have a poorly updated website, jackphoenix.com. I'm also on Blue Sky and having a lot of fun over there. So I'm comics librarian on Blue Sky. And yeah, those are the best places to look for me.
Excellent. And Dave?
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky also, David Accampo. I haven't really gotten into Blue Sky fully yet. Actually, to be honest, though, that's more like social media in general. I've been pulled back away from the last few years, but Blue Sky would be the one, is probably the one that, and I'm still on Instagram and Threads as I think DACCAMPO. So you can find me out there. I do also have a poorly updated website, davidacampo.com. But most importantly, I really want people to go to Fanbase Press and buy a copy of The Margins, the book I did with Barbara and Bryant, the publishers of Fanbase, and they were awesome. And I love that. I still have very fond memories of working with you guys on that book. So,
Well, it's an excellent book. We have plenty of copies, so please come order them. We'd love to send you
yes.
one. Well, once again, Dave, Jack, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal, and it's always a joy to have a discussion like this with you.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Well, that wraps everything up for this episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. I do want to encourage everyone to like both Fanbase Press and the Fanbase Weekly on Facebook and Twitter. You can also find Fanbase Press on Blue Sky as well. And the Fanbase Weekly is available for you to subscribe to and rate on Apple Podcasts. Those subscriptions and ratings really help us out. So, if you like the show, definitely leave us a review, leave us a rating, and definitely subscribe. I also want to remind people they can email us with comments, questions, suggestions, anything, any geeky inquiries you might have. What did you think of Superman Aliens, 30 years later? Send those comments to us at fanbaseweekly@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to share them in a future episode. I also do want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Studio 127, and their comic book series, California Inc. In the fourth and final installment of the California Inc. miniseries, we'll see which alliances prevail and what the future holds for the corporate country. Is it a dystopian dream with a rude awakening, or does it pave an unprecedented path for other countries? If you're new to California Inc., you can collect the full series and experience the complete 96-page story through 4 issues, now live on Kickstarter. Visit Kickstarter.com and search for California Inc. INC.